The scream sliced through the corridors of Greystone Manor like a blade, shrill and abrupt, pulling the night into a stunned silence. The clatter of a crystal glass echoed from the drawing room as Lady Tamsin Cray dropped her sherry. A footman froze halfway up the staircase. In the library, Sir Alaric Cray jolted upright from his armchair, a newspaper slipping from his lap as he turned toward the hallway. That scream, piercing, female, terrified, had come from the east wing. More precisely, from the locked blue bedroom at the end of the corridor, a room left unoccupied for years. Or so they believed. By the time Sir Alaric reached the room, the household had already begun to gather. His daughter Beatrice stood pale and breathless at the top of the stairs, gripping the banister. The housekeeper, Mrs. Netherby, clutched her robe, her face lined with dread. Young Patrick Cray, Alaric's nephew and a scholar at Cambridge, lingered a few steps behind, an unreadable expression on his face. The door was locked from the inside. No response came to their knocking, only the whisper of wind brushing against the hallway drapes. It was Alaric who fetched the brass master key. With an unsteady hand, he inserted it into the lock. The door creaked open slowly. The sight within froze them all. Lying across the Persian rug was a woman, her head turned sharply to the side, eyes wide open in a ghastly expression. Her lips were parted, as if the scream had not fully left her mouth. She wore a plum-colored evening dress, one sleeve torn. There were no signs of a struggle. No blood, no broken furniture, nothing disturbed except her presence. A mirror on the far wall was cracked. A single high-heeled shoe rested near the desk. No one in the Cray family recognized her. "What is the meaning of this?" Beatrice managed to gasp. "Who is she?" Before anyone could answer, the butler, Reeves, stepped forward with his usual restraint. "Sir, there is a matter I should mention. A note, hand-delivered an hour ago. I placed it in your study, thinking it could wait until morning." Alaric turned sharply. "What sort of note?" "A most curious envelope, sir. Addressed not to you, but to Monsieur Hercule Poirot." The following morning, Poirot arrived at Greystone Manor, accompanied by Inspector Flint of the local police. The morning mist still clung to the manor's clipped hedges and gravel paths, but Poirot, bundled in a grey overcoat with a silk scarf and gloves, was as composed as ever. Inside the drawing room, the Crays sat stiffly, the air heavy with unease. Sir Alaric, stern and broad-shouldered, poured himself a measured drink. Beatrice, fine-featured and striking in her silence, sat near the window, her hands tight in her lap. Patrick leafed through a book distractedly, though his eyes watched everything. Lady Tamsin stood apart, fingers to her temples. Poirot accepted a cup of tea from Mrs. Netherby and allowed the silence to stretch before he spoke. "The letter, if you please," he said softly. Sir Alaric retrieved the note from his desk. Poirot opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of cream paper, the handwriting elegant but firm. "Monsieur Poirot, if you're reading this, then it is too late. I have done something I cannot undo, but justice must still be served. The truth is buried within these walls. Behind a door they would rather remain locked. Listen for the scream, and you will understand. I place my trust in your little grey cells." A friend Poirot reread the note twice. Then he turned to Sir Alaric. "You say no one knows this woman?" "No one." "I swear it," Alaric replied. "And the room, when was it last used?" Lady Tamsin answered this time, her voice faint. "Not since. Since our son Oliver died." It was his room. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. "When was that?" 4 years ago. "And since then locked?" "Yes." I insisted. Poirot stood and paced slowly, his gaze drifting from face to face. "Then you must forgive my curiosity, mes amis. But how does an unknown woman find her way into a locked room in a house full of people, scream aloud, and die, apparently without a mark on her body?" Inspector Flint, a burly man with a tidy mustache, cleared his throat. We found no identification on the body. Nothing to link her to anyone here. No sign of forced entry. It looks, if you'll pardon the word, impossible. Poirot's eyes twinkled faintly. Ah, the perfect word. You see, Inspector, when a thing appears impossible, it is usually because it is merely improbable. And that, I assure you, is where the truth likes to hide. He turned back to the group. No one recognizes the woman. No one admits to letting her in. Yet she came. She screamed, and she died. So we must begin with what is known. Poirot retrieved a small notebook from his coat pocket. "Tell me, monsieur," he said, addressing Sir Alaric, "who was present at the house last night?" Alaric exhaled slowly. "Myself, my wife, Beatrice, Patrick, our housekeeper, the butler, and our cook, though she would have been asleep in the West Wing." Poirot nodded. "And visitors?" "None." Poirot looked again at the note. "A friend," he murmured. "But to whom?" He turned his attention to Patrick. "You are a student, yes? At Cambridge?" "Yes, Monsieur Poirot. I'm studying philosophy, and you arrived recently?" "2 nights ago." Poirot studied him briefly, but said nothing more. He turned toward the housekeeper. "Madame Netherby, were all the windows in that room locked from the inside?" "They were, sir." "And the dust? It hadn't been disturbed. No one had been in there for months, I'm sure of it." Poirot gently tapped the edge of the teacup. "Except someone was. And someone else knew she would be." He looked around the room. "You're all certain that you had never seen her before?" A murmur of confirmation rippled through the group. Poirot's gaze paused on Beatrice for a moment, whose silence had been unbroken since his arrival. Her fingers still knotted tightly in her lap. She gave the slightest nod. Poirot leaned back. "Very well. Then we begin." He turned to Flint. "You will allow me to see the body?" Flint gestured toward the hallway. "Of course. But you won't find much." Poirot smiled faintly. "It is rare that I find much where others expect it. And vice versa, mon ami." As they exited, Poirot paused at the threshold of the drawing room and looked back at the assembled family. His expression was unreadable, but his voice was calm. "One final thing. When you hear a scream behind a locked door, it is not merely the sound that matters. It is the reason the door was locked before the scream, and by whom the body had been moved to the cold room adjacent to the cellar under Inspector Flint's supervision." Poirot descended the back staircase with him, the manor eerily silent save for the rhythmic creak of the steps. As they entered the chilly, stone-walled chamber, the woman's form lay under a sheet on a long wooden table, surrounded by the sterile scent of carbolic soap and damp brick. Poirot's face remained still as Flint pulled back the covering. She looked peaceful now. Her expression had relaxed, though the echo of terror remained in her parted lips and wide eyes. Her skin bore no signs of violence, and her hands, placed gently across her chest, showed no defensive wounds. Poirot studied her for nearly a full minute, silently observing every detail. The broken clasp on her left earring, the faint smudge of rouge on her right cheek, the sliver of chipped polish on her left thumb. Her dress was elegant but worn at the hem, something once expensive, now dated. A subtle perfume still lingered faintly, jasmine and myrrh. He motioned toward her wrists. No ligature marks, no bruising on the neck, and yet there is fear frozen on her face. She screamed, but from what? Flint sighed. Could be poisoning. We've sent for a pathologist, but it'll take a day. Poirot's brow furrowed. Poison, perhaps. But there was no glass, no decanter, no food in that room, and she did not appear to have collapsed mid-step. She was posed, elegantly, even deliberately. Poirot turned. "Have you checked her nails?" "Underneath." Flint stepped closer and examined her hand. Clear, no residue, no powder, no scratches. Poirot nodded. Then we are dealing perhaps not with a physical struggle, but a psychological one. Something that terrified her so deeply, so immediately, that it was fatal. He stepped back. Close her eyes, please. There is something almost indecent about leaving them like that. Merci, Flint obliged, drawing the lids shut gently with 2 fingers. Poirot folded his hands and looked down. She had a story, one that ended too soon, and now we must understand where it began. Back upstairs, the drawing room had taken on the air of a stage awaiting actors. The family had been told to remain present. Poirot entered with a renewed focus, standing now in the center of the room like a conductor about to raise his baton. I would like to speak with each of you, alone. But first, I must understand what relationships exist within this house. Sir Alaric stepped forward, his tone clipped. You're not suggesting one of us is involved? Poirot tilted his head. I suggest nothing, monsieur. But it is impossible to find the truth if one does not know the players in the drama. Lady Tamsin sat back down, her voice tight. Very well. Alaric and I have been married 32 years. Beatrice is our daughter. Patrick is our nephew, Alaric's late brother's son. He's been staying here during his term. Poirot turned to Mrs. Netherby, who stood near the door. And the staff? Myself, Reeves the butler, and Mrs. Ellis the cook. We have no other servants at present, Poirot considered this. So, a closed house, 7 residents, 4 family, 3 staff, and now 1 dead woman who should not have been here at all. He looked to Beatrice, who met his gaze with surprising steadiness. You were the first at the top of the stairs, mademoiselle. I was, she replied. You heard the scream? Yes. It came from the east wing. I was coming from my room. And what did you do? I ran to the sound. Everyone else arrived shortly after. Poirot nodded slowly. And you are certain it was the blue bedroom? Yes. The door was locked. My father opened it with the key. Poirot walked slowly to the mantel and studied the photographs there. Family portraits, mostly, and a faded photo of a young man with a bright smile and tousled hair. Your son? Poirot asked, glancing at Lady Tamsin. She hesitated. Yes. Oliver? He died 4 years ago. A riding accident. Poirot nodded, noting the way her eyes flinched. And the room was his? It was. I couldn't bear to go in after. Poirot turned to Patrick. And you, monsieur, when did you arrive? 2 nights ago. I've been working on my dissertation and needed the quiet. And had you explored the house? No, I stayed mostly in the study, very scholarly. Poirot's tone was unreadable. And you, Reeves? He asked, as the butler entered silently with a silver tray. Yes, sir. You delivered the letter addressed to me. How did it come? A man on a bicycle, sir. Said it was urgent. Gave it to me just after 9 last night. Did he say who sent it? No, sir. He vanished down the drive before I could ask. Poirot paused. And the handwriting, it was unfamiliar. Yes, sir. Poirot looked down at the letter once again. It was written by someone who knew of the murder before it occurred, and who knew it would be mysterious enough to require my presence. He looked back at the family. This was not a random death. It was a message. The scream, the locked door, the familiar room. It was meant to unsettle, to awaken a memory, perhaps, or a guilt. He glanced at Inspector Flint. We must gather them one by one. I will begin with Mademoiselle Beatrice Rose, and Poirot gestured toward the small parlor beside the drawing room. As they entered, he closed the door gently behind them. Now, mademoiselle, he said softly, tell me not of the scream, not of the body. Tell me about your brother. She blinked. Oliver? Yes. What sort of young man was he? She looked down at her hands. Charming. Popular. Everyone liked him. He was the favorite. Father adored him. Mother doted on him. He had that way of making you feel small, but you didn't even realize it until later. He could be cruel, but always with a smile. Poirot watched her carefully. And his death, it was truly an accident? She hesitated just a moment too long. Yes, that's what we were told. Poirot's fingers tapped the edge of his cane. Were you close to him? We used to be. Before? She looked up suddenly, as if catching herself. It doesn't matter. He's gone. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. Perhaps not as gone as you believe. He rose. Merci, mademoiselle. You have been most helpful. He opened the door and gestured to Patrick. Monsieur, if you please. As Patrick entered, Poirot closed the door once more, the weight of unspoken secrets clinging to the room like smoke. Outside, the corridors of Greystone Manor seemed to breathe with memory, every shutter, every rug, every wall holding some part of the story. And somewhere within that story, the scream behind the door was waiting to be explained. Patrick Cray entered the small parlor with a detached calm that did not match the tension hanging in the air. He had the kind of face that looked constantly amused, even when the corners of his mouth were neutral. Poirot gestured for him to sit, folding his hands neatly in his lap as he took the chair opposite. You study philosophy, oui? Poirot asked lightly. Correct. Epistemology, mostly. The study of knowledge. How we know what we know. Poirot allowed a smile. Then perhaps you will appreciate this interview more than most. You see, I'm trying to understand how you know what you say you know. Patrick gave a soft chuckle. I suppose that's fair. Bon, then let us begin simply. You said you arrived 2 nights ago. Yes. By train? Car. My friend dropped me off. What time? Patrick thought. Around 6 in the evening. I came straight in and went to my room. I didn't see much of anyone else until dinner. Poirot made a note. Did you know the blue bedroom was once your cousin's room? Of course. We don't speak of it, but everyone knows. It's like a shrine now. And did you go near that room at any point? Patrick's expression flickered briefly, something unreadable passing across his eyes. No, I stayed to the west wing. Didn't even walk that way. Did you hear the scream? I did. I was reading. Thought someone dropped something heavy at first. Then I came out and saw everyone heading toward the east corridor. Poirot nodded slowly. You didn't recognize the woman? Not at all. She looked older than me. Mid-30s, maybe. Poirot studied him. You seem quite composed for someone who found a dead body in a sealed room. Patrick's smile returned faintly. Shock doesn't always look like panic, Monsieur Poirot. I process things differently. Indeed. And how well do you know your cousin Beatrice? Patrick hesitated. She's clever. Private. We're not especially close, but we get along. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Did you get along with Oliver? A bit. Not really. He was intense. Bit of a bully. Everyone adored him, but I never understood why. Poirot nodded once. Merci, Monsieur Cray. That will be all for now. As Patrick left, Poirot signaled to Reeves, who brought in Lady Tamsin next. She looked fragile beneath her exterior of refinement, a porcelain mask concealing something brittle. Poirot remained standing as she entered. Madame, he said gently, thank you for speaking with me. Of course, she murmured, sitting with careful grace. I must ask about the woman. Are you absolutely certain you have never seen her before? I'm certain, she said, but there was the faintest hesitation at the end. Poirot caught it. She wore an older style of dress. One that may have been fashionable some years ago. Perhaps someone you once knew. I don't recall her. Truly, did your son, Oliver, ever bring guests here that you are unaware of? Lady Tamsin's hands tensed on her lap. He had many friends. Some I met, some I didn't. He was secretive sometimes, but no one like her. Poirot observed her closely. And your husband, did he know more of Oliver's companions? She looked away. Perhaps. Alaric never spoke of such things. Poirot nodded. And tell me, this accident, the one that took your son, was there an inquest? Yes. The horse reared. He was thrown. The coroner ruled it. Accidental. Poirot tilted his head. Do you believe it was accidental? Her eyes snapped to his, and for a moment something flickered. Fear, guilt, anger. It was impossible to say. It doesn't matter what I believe. He's gone. Poirot gave a slight bow of the head. Merci, madame. Lady Tamsin stood slowly, her movements careful, and left without another word. Poirot turned next to Reeves. The butler entered with professional solemnity, bowing slightly. You have worked here how long, monsieur? 18 years, sir. Then you knew Oliver from boyhood. Yes, sir. Helped teach him chess when he was 6. Poirot's tone softened. And what sort of young man did he become? Reeves folded his hands. Charming, as most Crays are. But he was volatile, had moods. I learned not to cross him. Volatile in what way? Explosive temper. Brooding one day, exuberant the next. He once struck a stable boy over a scratched boot. Did he know the woman who died? Reeves paused. I can't say. She did not look familiar to me, but the household saw many guests over the years. You received the letter addressed to me? From a man on a bicycle? Yes, sir. Around 9 o'clock. I left it in Sir Alaric's study. Poirot glanced up. Would that be the same study where young Patrick said he spent much of his time? Reeves' brow twitched faintly. Yes, sir. It's the warmest room in the house. Poirot made a quiet note. Was the door to the blue bedroom always locked? Yes. I checked it once a week for dust. Always locked. I held the only master key aside from Sir Alaric. You did not use it last night? No, sir. Did anyone ask for it? No, sir. Not even young Mr. Cray? Reeves hesitated. No. Not directly, but indirectly. He asked me where the old nursery keys were stored. I found that strange. Poirot lifted a brow. And when was this? Yesterday morning. Poirot nodded slowly. Merci, Reeves. You've been most precise. The next interview was with Mrs. Netherby, the housekeeper. She entered with an air of nervous dignity. You knew the girl was dead the moment you saw her? Poirot asked. I did. Her eyes were hollow. Did she look familiar? Mrs. Netherby swallowed. She reminded me of someone. A girl who came to visit years ago. She stayed a night, quiet, blonde. But I thought nothing of it. What was her name? I don't know. She was never introduced. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. And did she stay in the blue bedroom? I believe so. It was long ago. Maybe 6 or 7 years. Poirot scribbled something quickly. What year did Oliver turn 18? Mrs. Netherby blinked. Let me think. That would have been 1929. Poirot closed his notebook. And who kept the visitor logs for the house at that time? Reeves. In the servants' ledger, Poirot stood. Merci, madame. You may go. When she exited, Poirot returned to the drawing room, where Inspector Flint waited impatiently by the hearth. Well, the inspector asked. Any progress? Poirot tapped his fingers together. There is something curious, mon ami. A young woman once stayed in the same room where this one died. Possibly the same woman. No name recorded. She arrived and vanished quietly. And now, years later, she returns to scream and die behind a locked door. That is no coincidence. Flint folded his arms. You think it's personal? Poirot gave a tight smile. With murder, it is always personal. Poirot moved to the study and asked to see the servant's ledger. Reeves brought it promptly. Poirot sat with a lamp and began turning pages, his finger scanning names and dates with hawk-like precision. There it was. July, 1930. One line stood out. Miss E-guest of Mr. Oliver Cray, stayed one night, departed morning, no last name, just an initial, a deliberate omission. Poirot exhaled through his nose. Voila, the past returns. He closed the book and looked toward the stairs. Somewhere above, behind thick walls and locked doors, lay answers long buried. Someone in this house had opened that door, perhaps not just last night, but years ago. And now, Poirot thought, that door has screamed back. The morning fog had lifted slightly by the time Inspector Flint returned from a short excursion to the village constabulary, his boots leaving muddy imprints on the tiled floor of Greystone's front hall. Poirot was already in the drawing room, reviewing the visitor logs again with meticulous attention. Flint entered briskly, eyes sharp with newfound energy. "We may have something," he said. Poirot looked up, raising one eyebrow. One of the constables recognized the woman. Flint continued. "A match from an incident report. 2 years ago in Harrogate. She was questioned in connection with a domestic theft. Went by the name Eliza Marsh. Allegedly had a relationship with a wealthy student. Case was never pursued. No charges filed. But get this. She was said to have worked under another name too. Lena Marel." Poirot's fingers paused mid-turn of a page. "Lena Marel," he repeated slowly. "A stage name. Possibly. Or perhaps a name she used to move in certain circles." Poirot considered this, closing the book. "A young woman with more than one identity, known for associating with wealthy young men, and now dead in the room once occupied by a very wealthy young man who also had, shall we say, complicated relationships." Flint nodded. "That's not all. The constable said she had connections to someone from Cambridge, Patrick Cray's age. It was never confirmed, but they mentioned a name. The reports say she went quiet shortly after." Vanished. Poirot's brow furrowed. "Then she resurfaces here. In the dead of night. In the one room that has been sealed since Oliver's death." Flint crossed his arms. "You think she was here to confront someone?" "I think," Poirot said slowly, "she was here to expose something." Poirot stood and gestured for Reeves. "Please ask Sir Alaric to join us. There is something I must clarify." Moments later, Sir Alaric entered, his face stiff with restrained irritation. He poured himself a brandy and stood beside the hearth. "You wanted to speak to me, Monsieur Poirot?" "Yes, monsieur. About this woman. Her name, we believe, was Eliza Marsh, or perhaps Lena Marel. Does either name mean anything to you?" Alaric shook his head. "No, I've never heard them before." "Your son, Oliver, did he ever mention a girl of that name? Someone he brought to the house? A visitor who stayed briefly?" "I told you, I don't recall every one of Oliver's acquaintances. He was private." Poirot studied him a moment. "You kept many secrets for him, I think." Alaric's expression turned steely. "He was my son. I protected him as any father would." Poirot nodded slowly. "Even after his death?" The silence hung between them like smoke. Poirot did not press further. Alaric turned and left without another word. When he was gone, Flint muttered, "He's hiding something." "As are they all," Poirot murmured. "But now we must entertain the first illusion of resolution." "Meaning?" Poirot tapped the notebook in his hand. "There is always a moment in these affairs when someone appears to be guilty. A person with motive, with connection, with opportunity, just enough to divert the gaze. And I believe such a person now sits upstairs." He did not wait for a reply. Instead, he moved swiftly toward the stairs and requested Reeves to fetch Patrick Cray once again. Patrick entered the study wearing the same unreadable expression, though this time there was a tension in his shoulders he could not conceal. Poirot gestured toward the armchair. "Sit, if you please, monsieur." Patrick lowered himself slowly. Poirot remained standing. "You told me you arrived 2 nights ago, that you remained in the study, that you heard the scream from your room, all true." "And yet," Poirot said softly, "the letter sent to me, warning of the scream and the death, was delivered at 9 o'clock last night, when, supposedly, no one but the family and staff were present. No visitors, and yet a woman was in the house. A woman who died shortly after the letter was sent." Patrick's jaw shifted slightly. Poirot continued, "We now know her name, Eliza Marsh. Also, Lena Morel, a woman who once had a brief liaison with a student, wealthy, from Cambridge. I told you, I don't know her." Poirot nodded, then took something from his pocket. A small photo, black and white, pulled from a local Harrogate file Inspector Flint had procured. It showed Eliza Marsh smiling faintly, standing beside a bicycle. "Are you certain?" Patrick stared at it. "I may have seen her once. At a debate hall. But I never spoke to her." Poirot's tone remained level. "And yet she died in your cousin's old bedroom. The very room you asked Reeves about yesterday morning, under the pretense of searching for nursery keys. I didn't go inside, but you thought about it." Patrick looked away. "It's the most remote part of the house." "I was curious." Poirot stepped closer. "Did you let her in?" Patrick stood abruptly. "No, I didn't even know she was here." Poirot held up his hand. "Then how did she arrive?" "A house, locked at night, no open doors, no known entry. Someone let her in. Someone gave her access to the east wing." Patrick's voice rose. "Why would I do that?" "I didn't know her. I had nothing to do with her." Poirot regarded him coolly. "Perhaps not. Or perhaps she knew something about you, about Oliver, about what happened years ago. Perhaps she threatened to reveal it." Patrick clenched his fists. "You're twisting this." Poirot's gaze narrowed. "And yet you admit you were near the study, near the note, near the key, near the blue room. Closer than anyone else." Patrick glared at him. "If you're accusing me, say it outright." Poirot was silent for a moment. Then, "I do not accuse, monsieur. I observe. And I observe that for all your dispassion, your hands shake." Patrick glanced down, startled to see the faint tremble in his fingers. He pulled them behind his back. Poirot turned toward Flint. "We must search his room." Quietly. "Anything that connects him to Lena Morel or Oliver's death must be examined." Patrick remained rigid. "You're wasting your time." Poirot only replied, "We shall see." Flint left to coordinate the search. Poirot lingered alone in the study for a moment, deep in thought. He was not satisfied. The clues pointed too neatly toward Patrick, too conveniently toward guilt. It felt designed, orchestrated, like a hand had guided suspicion into the most accessible direction. Later, Reeves returned with a small item wrapped in cloth. "In the back of Mr. Patrick's drawer, sir." Hidden beneath the lining, Poirot unwrapped it. It was a torn photograph, ripped clean through the center, jagged at the edges. One half was missing entirely. The remaining piece showed Oliver's unmistakable face, grinning at the camera, one arm curled around a woman whose features were gone, save for a single earring, a match to the one worn by the dead woman. Poirot stared at it silently. "So he did know her," Flint said. Poirot nodded, but slowly. He knew of her, but whether he feared her or tried to protect her, that remains to be seen. Flint folded his arms. "It's enough to bring him in." Poirot tapped the photo once, but not enough to prove murder. Not yet. They returned to Patrick's room. He stood in silence as Flint presented the photograph. His face darkened, but he said nothing. "I found that years ago," he said finally, "behind an old desk. I didn't know who she was, yet you kept it. I thought it was strange that Oliver would hide it. Poirot stared at him for a long time. You're lying about something. Not the murder, perhaps, but something important. Patrick's jaw clenched again. You won't understand. You weren't here back then. Poirot gave a soft, thoughtful nod. No, but she was, and now she is again. He stepped closer. The past has a way of unlocking itself, monsieur. Like the blue bedroom, you may close a door, but you cannot always keep the scream from escaping. He turned and exited. In the hallway, Poirot paused briefly, gazing at the staircase. A false lead had surfaced, convenient, compelling, but not quite complete. Something was still missing. Not the motive, not the means, the truth. And it was waiting, somewhere in the shadows of Greystone Manor. The afternoon light slanted through the high windows of Greystone Manor, gilding the dust in the air as if even time itself had slowed to observe the quiet unraveling. Poirot stood in the main hall with his hands clasped neatly behind his back, gazing at the family portraits mounted above the oak wainscoting. He studied Oliver's image again, smiling, confident, arrogant, caught forever in the moment before his fall. Below it, Sir Alaric paced near the fireplace, muttering under his breath. The others had scattered for the time being, though Poirot had ensured they would not stray far. Now came the part he relished most, not the gathering of facts, but the stirring of minds. People revealed more when cornered by doubt than when comforted by silence. He found Lady Tamsin seated in the conservatory, her hands wrapped around a cup of untouched tea, her expression distant. Without asking, Poirot sat across from her. "You are fond of Oliver," he said quietly. She looked at him, startled. "He was my son. Yet fondness is not love. One can adore a child and still fear them." She said nothing, but her fingers tightened around the teacup. Poirot continued gently. "A mother often sees what others choose to ignore. You protected him, even when you should not have." Her voice came barely above a whisper. He had moods, fits, but Alaric said it was normal, just part of being a Cray. And the girl, Eliza Marsh, Lena Morell. She stayed here once, did she not? I didn't know her name, but yes, she came one summer. Quiet, polite. I found her crying in the garden once. I asked Oliver what was wrong. He laughed. Poirot watched her carefully. "What did he do to her?" Lady Tamsin shook her head slowly. "He ruined her, and then he discarded her. Like all the others, you knew she had returned." "No, I swear to you I didn't know. But I felt it. Something shifted in this house, like her presence stirred the walls." Poirot nodded, rising slowly. "Thank you, madame." From there, he moved to the billiard room, where Sir Alaric was standing alone with a glass of port, staring at the table with unfocused eyes. Poirot stood silently until Alaric noticed him. "Another interrogation?" Alaric asked gruffly. "Not at all. I only wish to ask one thing. Did you know what Oliver did to that girl?" Alaric's jaw twitched. "Whatever occurred between my son and a woman years ago is no longer relevant." "He's dead." Poirot stepped forward. "But she was not. She came back, and she screamed in your house. What did she say to you, Sir Alaric?" "She said nothing. I never saw her, but you knew who she was." Alaric turned away. "She sent a letter once, after Oliver died. I read it, then I burned it. What did it say?" Alaric's voice was bitter. That she had loved him, that he destroyed her, that she would never forgive him. "And you?" "I protected my family, my name. I thought she would go away." Poirot's voice sharpened. "But she didn't. She came back, and now she is dead. That is not the end of a letter. That is the beginning of vengeance." Alaric slammed his glass down. You want me to say I killed her? I didn't, but if I had known she was here, I might have sent her away again. Poirot's expression was unreadable, but someone let her in, and someone unlocked that door. He left Alaric fuming in silence. Poirot found Beatrice on the back lawn, seated on a stone bench beneath the skeletal rose trellis. She stared ahead, unmoving. She was kind, Beatrice said, before he even reached her. Poirot paused. You knew her? Not well, but I remember her. She came to the house when I was 19. I watched her from the stairs. She looked like she didn't belong. Did you speak to her? No, but I heard her. That night, arguing with Oliver, crying. He told her she was nothing. Poirot sat beside her. And you said nothing. I was afraid of him. He had a way of controlling every room. Did you see her again? Only once, in town. A year later, she passed me without a word, but her eyes, they remembered. Why do you think she returned? To make him pay. But he was already dead. Beatrice looked at him. Then maybe she came to make us pay. Poirot stood and said nothing for a moment. Then, softly, You're carrying something heavy, mademoiselle. When you are ready, I hope you will place it down. He returned to the drawing room, where Inspector Flint waited with folded arms. Well, the inspector asked. Anything useful? Poirot nodded. Plenty, but not evidence. Reactions, Flint frowned. We need something solid. No, mon ami, we need truth. And that comes not from fingerprints, but from fear. Poirot turned to Reeves, who stood quietly nearby. Please prepare the main salon. I wish to gather everyone. There is a matter I must test. Together. Within the hour, the entire household was assembled. Sir Alaric, grim and fuming. Lady Tamsin, pale and withdrawn. Beatrice, expression unreadable. Patrick, stiff and silent. Reeves and Mrs. Netherby standing discreetly near the doorway. Poirot stood before them, immaculate as ever, but with a subtle charge to his posture. He held up the torn photograph. This was found in Patrick's room. It shows Oliver and the deceased woman, Eliza Marsh, or Lena Morel, a young woman wronged by someone in this house. He let the silence sink in. You all claim not to have seen her since that visit years ago. And yet, last night, someone let her in. Someone opened the door that has remained locked for 4 years. He walked slowly across the room. She did not scream because she was attacked. She screamed because she saw something, or someone. She screamed out of recognition, and then she died. He stopped by the fireplace. But the cause of death was not poison, not violence, no marks, nothing visible, which tells me something more insidious occurred, a death of the mind, not the body. He looked toward Lady Tamsin. You knew she would return. She flinched, but said nothing. Sir Alaric, you received a letter. You burned it, but you remember every word. Alaric's fists tightened. Poirot turned to Patrick. You searched for keys. You claimed curiosity, but you feared discovery, and finally, to Beatrice. You heard them arguing that night years ago. You saw her cry, and yet you did nothing. She looked away. Poirot paused, letting their guilt stew, not over murder, but over years of silence. Then he dropped the final piece. I found the other half of the photograph. He stepped to the piano and lifted the lid. Beneath the keys lay a second piece, tucked under the edge. Reeves, eyes wide, stepped forward and confirmed it. I tuned this last week. It wasn't there then. Poirot held the matched halves together. The full image revealed Oliver with his arm around Eliza, his mouth near her ear, her face tilted just slightly away, almost uncomfortable. Poirot looked at them all. This was planted recently, which means someone wanted it to be found. Inspector Flint leaned in. You're saying someone's framing Patrick? Not framing, Poirot murmured. Guiding. redirecting suspicion. He turned to Beatrice. "You never left the house last night, but someone did. Someone met her at the gate. Someone let her in and led her to that room. Someone who remembered where Oliver had hidden the photo and split it themselves." Beatrice's face was ashen. "You were the only one who saw her cry that night, and the only one who looked for her again. You felt guilt, perhaps pity, perhaps rage." Poirot paused, then stepped back. "But you did not kill her. You found her already broken." He folded his hands. "And now, mademoiselle, it is time to tell me what really happened when you went upstairs last night." Beatrice did not speak right away. Her eyes, glassy and fixed, remained trained on the broken photograph in Poirot's hand. The silence that followed his question pressed down on the room like a storm cloud. Sir Alaric shifted in his chair, restless. Lady Tamsin lowered her head, her fingers trembling in her lap. Patrick stared at the hearth with blank detachment. The only sound was the faint tick of the grandfather clock across the hall. Poirot remained still, not pushing. He knew the weight of silence often revealed more than 100 questions. When Beatrice finally spoke, her voice was flat, dry from disuse or perhaps from the years of secrets stored in her throat. "I didn't kill her," she said. Poirot nodded once. "I do not believe that you did, mademoiselle. But I believe you saw her alive." "I did." "When?" "Around 8:30. I'd gone to the library to fetch a book. When I returned to the hall, she was there, at the base of the staircase, wearing that same plum dress. She looked smaller than I remembered." Tired Poirot leaned slightly forward. "Did she speak to you?" Beatrice hesitated. "She asked if Oliver was here." "And you told her?" "That he was dead." Poirot studied her. What was her reaction? Beatrice's mouth twisted. She laughed. Just once. A bitter little sound. Then she asked me if the blue room was still his, and I said yes. And then her voice faltered. Poirot waited. I told her where the key was. In the drawer behind the china cabinet. I didn't follow her. I just watched her walk down the corridor. Poirot's voice was quiet. Why didn't you stop her? Beatrice looked up, her expression unreadable. Because I wanted to know what she'd do. Sir Alaric stood abruptly. This is madness. Why was she even here? What did she want from us? Poirot turned to him calmly. Answers, monsieur. She wanted answers. Perhaps closure. Perhaps revenge. She had been wronged, left with nothing. And the man responsible, your son, had died with his name intact. Perhaps she wanted to destroy his memory. He turned back to Beatrice. Did she carry anything? No, just a small handbag. That's all. Poirot frowned. And what did you do after she went into the room? I returned to my bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed. I was shaking, but I didn't know why. I never went to check on her. Poirot nodded slowly. Merci, mademoiselle. That helps. Before more could be said, a sudden voice cut through the room, panicked and high-pitched. It was Mrs. Netherby, appearing at the doorway with a look of alarm. Sir, Inspector, there's something you must see. Poirot rose at once. Where? The cellar. It's Reeves. He went to fetch some old linens and he hasn't come back. We found the door wide open and something's wrong. Poirot, Flint and Alaric followed at once, moving swiftly down the narrow servants' stairs. The air grew colder as they descended, heavy with the damp scent of stone and mildew. At the bottom, the open door to the cellar revealed a scene that froze them mid-step. Reeves was lying face down across the stone floor, a crate of dusty cloths spilled beside him. Flint rushed forward and crouched down, checking for a pulse. After a moment, he looked up. He's alive, but barely, breathing shallow. There's a bruise on the side of his head. Poirot immediately knelt. A fall? Flint shook his head. This was a blow. from behind Poirot, scanned the surroundings, eyes sharp. Nothing else in the cellar seemed disturbed, except the far wall where a row of old trunks had been hastily shifted. He stepped toward them. One of the trunks was ajar. Inside were old clothes, letters, and several bound books of photographs. Family archives. Poirot carefully removed one and opened it. The pages were mostly innocent. Childhood memories, portraits, Christmas gatherings, but on the final page was a photo he had not seen before. Eliza Marsh, unmistakably younger, standing in the Greystone garden. Behind her, though blurry, was Oliver, looking away as if unaware he had been captured in the frame. Flint stood behind him. What is this? Poirot closed the album. Proof. She had been here before, and someone had tried to erase her completely. They returned upstairs while Reeves was carried to a bed under supervision. Poirot gathered the others again. The second crime, the blow to the butler, had changed everything. This is no longer a mystery about a single death, Poirot said, his voice firmer now. Someone in this house struck Reeves. Someone desperate. That means they are watching every move. Every step we take, Patrick raised a brow. Why go after Reeves? Poirot tapped the photograph album. Because he was close to the truth. He remembered the old guest. He maintained the house. He knew what was hidden. Perhaps he even found something recently and was silenced before he could speak. Alaric's face reddened. Are you suggesting one of us attacked our own servant? Poirot stared at him. I am suggesting someone among us has lied repeatedly. Someone who didn't expect Eliza to come back, and who panicked when she did. Poirot stepped into the center of the room again. This second act, this attack, has revealed more than any confession. It tells me that the murderer is not simply covering a mistake. They are covering a pattern, a long-standing pattern of manipulation and control. He looked from face to face, and I now begin to see the shape of it. A shadow behind the Cray name. A figure who moved pieces from behind doors, who silenced, guided, and destroyed to preserve legacy and pride. His eyes stopped on Sir Alaric. Your son was not the only tyrant in this house. Alaric's nostrils flared. Careful, Poirot. No, I am precise. Your protection of Oliver was not paternal, it was political. You shaped this family like a chessboard. You silenced Eliza when she became inconvenient. And now, someone else is trying to clean up the remnants before the truth escapes. Lady Tamsin's voice cracked from the corner. Stop! All eyes turned to her. She rose slowly, shaking. You think you know everything, she said to Poirot. But you don't understand. This house, it's cursed by silence. That girl came back to haunt us, yes, but we deserved it. We all did. Poirot moved gently toward her. Then help me lift the curse, Madame. Her eyes brimmed. The key to that bedroom, there was only one. Alaric kept it, but last week I saw him take it from the safe. Poirot's head turned sharply. You're sure? He said he wanted to inspect the room. For repairs, Alaric's voice was thunder. That's a lie. Tamsin didn't flinch. You thought I wouldn't notice, but I did. You opened that door. You let her in, didn't you? Alaric was breathing heavily now. I did nothing of the sort. Poirot raised a hand. No one else had the key. Beatrice told the woman where it was, but someone had to place it there first, conveniently. Recently, Beatrice stared at her father. Was it you? Patrick stood. This doesn't make sense. Poirot held up both hands. No, messieurs, mesdames, do not rush. The pieces are shifting, but they are not yet settled. What we have now is a fracture, a secret splintering through this household. He looked toward the hallway. The attack on Reeves proves the killer is growing desperate. And desperate people make mistakes. Poirot turned to Flint. I must speak to Reeves when he wakes. Until then, I want this house watched. No one enters or leaves. The killer is here, and their next move will reveal everything. The house fell into a hush once more, but it was not the hush of peace. It was the hush before a final storm. Poirot moved through Greystone Manor alone, each polished floorboard reflecting the dimming light of late afternoon. He walked without speaking, his gloved hands folded behind his back, head slightly bowed as though in conversation with his thoughts. Somewhere behind the walls, the answer stirred. Not in emotion or confession, but in silence. In objects left untouched. In what others had stepped over without looking. He returned to the blue bedroom. The door was closed now, guarded by Inspector Flint's constable. Poirot nodded, and the man stepped aside. The room welcomed him with its stillness. The bed remained neatly made. The mirror remained cracked. The air, faintly scented with jasmine and old dust, still carried the ghost of the scream. Poirot crossed to the writing desk. He examined the objects again, not for what was there, but for what had changed. He reached for the chair and pulled it out slowly. Something clicked beneath it. Poirot crouched. Taped to the underside of the chair seat was a folded sheet of paper, aged and delicate. He peeled it off with care and opened it slowly. It was handwritten in fading blue ink. Short, direct. If anything happens to me, look behind the second panel in the music room. The portrait is a lie. So is the name he gave me. El Poirot stared at the note. Behind the second panel, he murmured. He folded it carefully and rose, his steps quiet and deliberate as he left the bedroom and made his way through the house toward the music room. The music room was rarely used. It held a grand piano, a few gilt-edged chairs, and two paintings, one of Lady Tamsin in her 20s and the other of a stormy coastal landscape, unsigned. Poirot ignored the piano entirely and turned his attention to the seascape. He examined the frame first, then gently pressed the edges. The panel behind the painting gave a soft click and moved inward. Inside was a shallow cavity in the wall. A flat wooden box had been wedged behind the frame, long and narrow. Poirot removed it and opened it on the nearest chair. Inside were letters, dozens, all handwritten, some dated as far back as 1930, all addressed to Lena Marelle, all signed. O.C. Poirot's face darkened. Each letter painted a clearer picture, a romantic entanglement followed by control. First flattery, then obsession. There were promises of marriage, then warnings, veiled threats. One mentioned an abortion, another hinted at blackmail. They weren't the words of a man in love. They were the words of a man trying to own someone, and when he couldn't, trying to erase hers. One letter was different. It was not addressed to Lena at all, but to Sir Alaric. Father, if she speaks, it could ruin us. You know how they are. She'll twist it. She came back once already. She says she's keeping a copy. She says she'll show Mother. You promised to take care of it. Oh, Poirot closed the lid. When he looked up, Inspector Flint stood in the doorway. You've found something, Flint said. I have found everything, Poirot replied. They reconvened in the drawing room, once again assembling the household. The tension was different now, heavy, certain. Beatrice sat with her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Patrick kept glancing at the clock. Lady Tamsin avoided her husband's gaze. Sir Alaric, though outwardly composed, had a tell. His fingers tapped softly against his cane, faster than before. Poirot stood by the hearth, the wooden box resting beside him. My friends, he said, we now approach the end. The scream behind the door is no longer an enigma. It was a cry of recognition, of horror, of the past returning. And the question was never only who killed Lena Marelle, but why she had to die at all. He lifted one of the letters from the box. She was not simply a guest who stayed years ago. She was trapped in Oliver's world, manipulated, threatened. And when she tried to escape, he did not let her. She carried his child. She was cast aside. Poirot looked to Lady Tamsin. You suspected the truth. You saw the signs, but you turned away. She closed her eyes. He turned to Patrick. You found the old photo, but never asked why it had been torn. You feared what it meant. Patrick looked down. Poirot's voice sharpened, but someone else knew exactly what it meant. Knew that Lena would come back eventually. Knew that she had kept proof. So when she returned, they staged a meeting, opened the blue bedroom, led her into the house, not to murder her by force, but to terrify her with the weight of what had already been done. And it worked. He pulled the hidden note from his pocket and read it aloud. The portrait is a lie. So is the name he gave me. She came to expose Oliver, but she discovered it wasn't only him. She learned she had been deceived by another, someone who claimed to help her, perhaps offered her safety or payment years ago, and now feared she might reveal everything. Poirot lifted the final letter, a letter from Oliver, not to Lena, but to his father, asking him to take care of it, saying Lena had copies, that she would go to Lady Tamsin. He turned to Sir Alaric. You didn't just burn the letter she sent after Oliver died. You destroyed her reputation. You bribed her to disappear. And when she came back, still alive, still carrying truth, you guided her to the room. You left the chair, the perfume, the cracked mirror, all details meant to disorient, and then you locked the door behind her. Alaric's face was stone. You didn't kill her with a weapon. You killed her with memories. You let the past do the work. You counted on her heart to give out, on the mind to snap. And when she did scream, when the scream echoed down your perfect corridor, you waited until no one could help her. Alaric stood slowly. You have no proof. Poirot gestured to the box. Letters. One in your name. A note hidden under the chair, placed by her before she died, for me to find. Reeves knew about the panel, didn't he? He kept the piano tuned. He saw you remove it. That's why you struck him. Lady Tamsin stood suddenly. You did this? Alaric turned to her coldly. I did what had to be done. For the family? No, Poirot said. You did it for yourself. For reputation, for legacy, for the Cray name. But the truth is louder than any name. And this time, it screamed. Alaric didn't resist when Flint stepped forward. His face had gone oddly calm, as though, in being unmasked, he had finally relaxed. Poirot turned to the others. It was never about a locked door. It was about a door opened too often, without consequence. Beatrice whispered. She never wanted revenge. Just to be seen, Poirot nodded. And now she has been. The drawing room at Greystone Manor had changed in character. Once a stage for polite conversation and guarded glances, it now bore the charge of judgment. Inspector Flint stood near the fireplace with folded arms, his face pale with the weight of Sir Alaric's arrest. Lady Tamsin sat hunched on the sofa, unmoving, her eyes vacant. Beatrice remained near the window, holding her arms tightly across her chest as though fending off an unseen wind. Patrick stood in the corner, a shadow against the bookcase, his jaw clenched, his thoughts unreadable. Poirot, always poised, stood in the center with the box of letters closed but not yet removed. His shoes were polished, his tie straight, but there was something more subdued now in his bearing, an echo of solemnity beneath his customary pride. He did not revel in the reveal. He never did, not truly. Because to understand the motive behind a death meant understanding the rot that had spread beneath the surface long before the crime. I ask you all to stay and listen, Poirot said, his voice calm, deliberate. Because though the man has been taken, the truth must still be given form. It must be complete, whole. Not just for Lena Morel, but for yourselves. He opened the box again, not to display its contents, but simply to acknowledge it, a symbol of the story and the silence it had held. Sir Alaric Cray, Poirot began, and was not a violent man in the traditional sense. He did not strike with fists or fire. His weapon was control, legacy, reputation. He orchestrated his world with precision, much like one might orchestrate a chess match. Poirot's gaze moved to Lady Tamsin. But such control always comes with sacrifice. You, Madame, sacrificed voice. You saw your son grow cold, cruel. You felt the fracture long before anyone admitted it. But you told yourself it was strength, that it was protection. Her head bowed lower. Poirot turned to Beatrice. You witnessed what others ignored. You saw the pain of that girl, Lena, years ago. But you were young, uncertain, and afraid. And when she returned, your guilt surfaced. You gave her access not to hurt her, but to understand her. To see if perhaps this time someone would listen. Beatrice swallowed, nodding faintly. And Patrick, Poirot said, turning last. You were caught between all of it. You found the photo, you suspected things, but you were taught early to observe and to say nothing. The Cray house taught that lesson well. Silence was not absence of knowledge. It was protection of it. Patrick's voice was hoarse. So I wasn't wrong. No, Poirot said. You were not. Poirot stepped closer to the hearth, where the fire had burned low. Oliver Cray met Lena in 1930. She was young, bright, hopeful. He seduced her quickly. But when she became inconvenient, when she became pregnant, he discarded her. She vanished, perhaps under threat, perhaps with money. But she carried something with her. Proof Poirot lifted the photograph. She had this. And letters. Dozens. From Oliver. From Alaric. They tried to erase her memory, but she held it tight. She returned once, shortly after Oliver's death, and tried to send a letter. Alaric burned it, but she never gave up. She returned again, and this time she made it inside. He turned back to the group. She did not sneak in. She was led in by Alaric. He retrieved the key, prepared the room, created the perfect theater for her breakdown. She was not murdered by poison, nor by hand, but by calculation. She was overwhelmed by fear, trauma, memories. She screamed because she remembered, and then her body failed her. Her heart, perhaps. Or the mind, shutting down after being cornered. Once again, Poirot lifted the small note she had hidden beneath the chair. But she left this. And when I found it, I knew it was no accident. She knew someone might silence her. She left a clue not for justice, but for acknowledgement. She wanted her truth seen before it was hidden again. He turned to Inspector Flint, who stood frozen. You saw a locked room and a dead woman with no wound. But the wounds were all in the past, and in this house, the past was always more dangerous than the present. Poirot looked at each of them in turn. The scream behind the door was not just her scream. It was the sound of everything this house had ignored, the sins that were left to ferment, the silences, the looks, the complicity. It was the sound of truth demanding to be heard. Lady Tamsin's voice cracked from the sofa. She came here to destroy us. No, Poirot said softly. She came here to be seen by you. And she died because she wasn't. The room fell quiet. Even the fire had dimmed to a slow hiss. Poirot stepped back, smoothing his jacket. This case is closed in the eyes of the law. Sir Alaric will face his justice. But you, mes amis, you must live with the echo of that scream. Not as guilt, but as a reminder. That silence too is a form of violence, and that the dead are never truly gone while their truths remain hidden. Beatrice stood up slowly. What will happen to her? Poirot looked at her. She will be buried under her real name. Lena Marelle, and her story will be written plainly. Not erased, not hidden. He turned toward the door. I will see to it myself. Then he paused, glanced over his shoulder, and said in a tone barely above a whisper, "Let that be the legacy of Greystone, not the Cray name nor its power, but the one scream that refused to be silenced." Poirot exited, his steps light, his silhouette shrinking into the corridor as the family remained still behind him, surrounded not by walls, but by memory. And outside, dusk settled over the grounds like a slow breath, drawing the curtain over a house that would never again be quite so quiet. The following morning broke in stillness, the mist over Greystone's grounds clinging to the earth like a veil. Inspector Flint had departed at dawn, escorting Sir Alaric to the county holding facility with 2 constables. No resistance, no protest, just a man stepping into the consequences he had spent a lifetime avoiding. Poirot remained in the study, alone, surrounded by the relics of the case, the letters in their wooden box, the torn photograph now restored, the small note hidden under the chair. In his notebook, he had mapped out every hour, every movement, and now, as he sipped his chocolate, he prepared for the final task, explaining not only who, but how, and most importantly, why. Beatrice entered softly. "You said I could come when I was ready." Poirot nodded. "Of course, mademoiselle." She sat across from him, folding her hands tightly in her lap. "I want to understand the timeline. What really happened that night?" Poirot closed his notebook and looked up, his expression gentle but firm. "Then let us reconstruct it. Every moment, every decision as it occurred. Not as we feared it or wished it, but as it truly unfolded." He placed the photograph before her. Lena Morell, born Eliza Marsh, met Oliver Cray in 1930 at a student function near Cambridge. He charmed her quickly. She believed he loved her. Letters followed, filled with passion and promises. She visited Greystone twice under false pretenses, using his name to gain entry without drawing attention. The staff assumed she was simply another friend. Beatrice nodded slowly. "I remember seeing her once." In the hallway, Poirot continued. "She became pregnant." Oliver panicked. He knew the scandal would taint his name, his future. He turned to his father. Sir Alaric intervened. Lena was offered money to disappear. She took it, but not in surrender. She took it as evidence. He gestured to the box. She kept the letters. Proof of what he had done. She disappeared from society, changed her name. But she never let go of what had been taken. Years passed. Then came news of Oliver's death. Poirot leaned in. She wrote to Sir Alaric again. Not to threaten, but to confront. The letter was burned. But still she watched, and this year she learned something, perhaps from a servant who remembered her, perhaps from a newspaper photo, that Greystone remained unchanged, that the blue bedroom still existed. She saw it as the scene of the crime, not of violence, but of abandonment. Beatrice's voice was small. So she came back. She came back. She arrived on foot shortly after dusk, and she did not sneak in. Sir Alaric had kept the original key. Whether by arrangement or surprise, he encountered her outside. We will never know the exact exchange of words, but I believe he saw her resolve and her danger. He let her in, perhaps promised her a conversation, perhaps pretended remorse. Then he led her to the blue bedroom. Poirot opened his hands, but that room had been staged. The perfume was placed, the mirror cracked deliberately. The lighting, the position of the furniture, all designed to resurrect her trauma. Beatrice looked stricken. He wanted her to break. Yes, Poirot said, and she did. But before she lost control, she did something extraordinary. She left behind a note under the chair, knowing someone, perhaps me, would come. She named the hiding place in the music room. A final contingency, Beatrice asked, and she collapsed? Poirot nodded. No signs of struggle. No poison. Likely a cardiac arrest brought on by psychological shock. She screamed once, loud enough to bring you all running. By the time you reached the door, it was locked. And she was gone. Beatrice's voice cracked. So it wasn't murder in the traditional sense? No, Poirot said softly. It was worse. It was cruelty through neglect, a deliberate orchestration of a breakdown. Sir Alaric believed it left no evidence. She looked away. But the photograph? Yes, you had seen it before. Patrick found it, kept it. Sir Alaric learned of it, or saw it, recently. And when Lena returned, he used the photograph's remnants to confuse the investigation. He placed half in Patrick's room, made him appear guilty, all while removing the box of letters from the hidden panel, until Reeves saw him do it. Reeves was silenced. Poirot closed the notebook. And that is the full pattern. The initial crime, years ago. Oliver's coercion, Alaric's cover-up. Lena's return, the calculated re-traumatization, the scream, the death, the misdirection, the second act of violence against Reeves. And finally, the unraveling. Beatrice was silent for a long time. Then she said, "I still don't know what I should have done." Poirot met her eyes. That is the curse of witnessing. We do not always know in the moment, but we can choose differently the next time. She nodded faintly. "Will you be leaving soon?" "Tomorrow," Poirot replied. "My work here is complete. But the consequences are only beginning." As she left the study, Poirot sat back. Outside, the grounds were still cloaked in fog, but the light had shifted. Not quite clarity, but no longer concealment. He heard the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Patrick speaking quietly with a constable. Lady Tamsin had requested solitude. No one had seen her since breakfast. Poirot allowed himself a moment of reflection. There had been no fingerprints, no blood, only whispers, omissions, and wounds that had healed wrong. That was the true art of murder in these circles. Not the act, but the erasure. But this time, the scream had echoed too loudly, and Poirot had listened. He rose, stepped to the fire, and tossed the last fragment of Lena's hidden note into the flames. Not to destroy it, but to release it. Her message had been heard. Then he turned, buttoned his coat, and prepared to leave the manor for good. The carriage that came to collect Hercule Poirot was modest, summoned quietly by Inspector Flint that morning at Poirot's request. There was no press outside the gates, no reporters gathering on the drive. Sir Alaric's arrest had been handled discreetly, just as he had lived, managing everything, even his fall from grace, behind closed doors. Yet, within the walls of Greystone Manor, nothing could remain hidden any longer. Poirot stood once more in the drawing room, this time with no audience. He straightened a cushion that had sagged under the weight of weeks of secrets and stepped back to examine the room with finality. There was no satisfaction in solving a crime like this. Only clarity. The kind of clarity that lingered like dust on a high shelf, undisturbed until someone forced the window open. Footsteps behind him announced Lady Tamsin's arrival. She was dressed in grey, a muted shawl over her shoulders. Her eyes, hollow but alert, met his. "You're leaving," she said softly. "Yes, madame," Poirot replied. "There is nothing more to observe." She remained by the doorway. "They'll talk about us, won't they?" "They will," Poirot answered, "but only for a time. Scandal fades. What matters is what remains behind, truth or silence. It is up to those still standing to choose which they'll carry." She nodded faintly. "I let it happen." "You endured it," Poirot corrected. "But now you must decide if endurance is all you will be remembered for." She said nothing. Poirot gave a slight bow and passed her. Outside, the mist had lifted. The morning sun exposed the estate in full detail, the hedgerows trimmed, the garden in bloom, the gravel path newly raked. It looked to any passer-by like peace. Beatrice waited at the carriage. She held a manila envelope in her hand. "These are the originals," she said. "Lena's letters. I thought they might be safer with someone who would protect them." Poirot accepted the envelope. "They will be preserved. Perhaps even published one day. If that is your wish." Beatrice looked out across the lawn. "It was never just about her. This house, it's made from things people chose not to see." Poirot said gently, "Then let that end with you." She nodded. "I'm staying. To clear out the East Wing, to finally take down his photographs. If there is one thing Lena gave me, it was the courage to remember her, instead of pretending she never existed." Poirot placed a hand on her arm, briefly. "She will not be forgotten. You have my word." She stepped back, and he climbed into the carriage. As the driver snapped the reins, Poirot leaned back, resting his hands on the envelope. The road bent gently around the Greystone property, and he did not look back. Justice, in this case, would not come from courts alone. Sir Alaric would be charged with obstruction, possibly reckless endangerment, though the law had no clean category for a death like Lena's. But the greater punishment would not be legal. It would be the shattering of his legend, the final permanent fracture in the Cray name. The illusion of legacy undone by one scream behind one locked door. As the carriage turned onto the main road, Poirot found himself reflecting not on Lena, but on what she represented. A young woman made invisible by power, made small by influence. But in the end, it had taken only a single piece of paper, a single note, to undo all the lies built around her. Back in town, Inspector Flint met Poirot for tea in a quiet corner cafe. "She'll never be on the front page," Flint said, sipping his cup. "No one will headline, 'Grieving woman dies of heart failure in locked bedroom.' You're the only reason anyone will hear the full story." Poirot stirred his tea. "It is enough that the truth was not buried beside her. That someone chose to look instead of turning away." Flint nodded. "Alaric's lawyers are already twisting things, claiming he didn't know she had a heart condition. Saying there's no proof he locked the door." Poirot smiled faintly. "The proof is in every silence that followed, in every memory that four people tried to bury. Let the court argue about locks. I will concern myself with memory." Flint leaned forward. "You think she meant to die?" "No," Poirot said at once. "I think she meant to be heard." The scream was not a plea. It was a verdict Flint exhaled, long and low. "And Reeves?" "He'll recover," Poirot replied. "And he will remember." "That is enough." Flint leaned back. "You know, I used to think murder was a thing of passion or greed. Something brutal, obvious. But this was like watching someone get erased." Poirot gave a small nod. "Precisely, mon ami. And that is why we must be vigilant not just of killers, but of those who believe erasure is more elegant than blood." They finished their tea in silence. Later that afternoon, Beatrice stood beside a small grave in the village cemetery. The marker was simple. Lena Morel, and she was here, and she mattered. The funeral was small. Beatrice, Reeves, Mrs. Netherby, and the local vicar. Lady Tamsin had not attended. Patrick had left earlier that morning for Cambridge, claiming he needed distance from the house. As the vicar stepped away, Beatrice placed a single daffodil at the base of the stone. She had not known Lena well, not really at all, but she knew what it meant to be unspoken, to live in the shadow of a louder voice. And now, Lena had something Beatrice herself had only just begun to grasp. Her truth unhidden. The Cray estate would remain, smaller, quieter, and no longer untouchable. Beatrice turned from the grave and walked slowly toward the lane, her hands no longer clenched, her steps no longer uncertain. Far away, in a quiet hotel room in London, Hercule Poirot unpacked his cases and placed the letters into a secure drawer. The case was over, but the lesson, like the scream, still echoed. Because, as Poirot always knew, the most dangerous crimes were never committed with knives or guns. They were committed with silence. London was unusually still. The streets outside Hercule Poirot's hotel room moved with the quiet rhythm of late evening. A world of dim lamps, horse hooves on cobblestone, and muffled laughter drifting from far-off windows. Poirot sat in a high-backed chair by the window, dressed impeccably as always, though the tie was now loosened, and his polished shoes had been set aside. Before him rested a low table with a single sheet of stationery, blank except for the date and the name he had written at the top. Lena Morel. He did not write anything more. Not yet. Instead, he stared out the window. The sounds of the city like distant waves against a mental shore already far from this place. His thoughts remained behind at Greystone Manor, where a scream had echoed down a long, locked hallway and forced the walls to speak. There were no headlines in the morning papers about the Cray family, no scandal splashed across the front page. Only a polite, understated obituary for Sir Alaric, citing his retirement from public life due to health concerns. His lawyers had negotiated quietly. He would not return to the estate, nor would the name Lena Morel ever be formally acknowledged in the legal proceedings. Poirot had expected as much. Some crimes were not for the courts. Some truths lived in quiet places, in drawers, in the memories of a butler, in the eyes of a young woman laying a flower at an unmarked grave. And sometimes, Poirot knew, justice did not come dressed in robes and powdered wigs. It came when silence was broken. He rose from the chair and crossed the room to a small leather-bound case. From it, he retrieved the envelope Beatrice had given him. He opened it once more, gently, and read the first of the letters again. Lena, you misunderstand me. I never meant for you to feel unwanted. But things are complicated. You must understand, my family expects discretion. Please don't do anything rash. I'll make sure you're comfortable. But we cannot be seen together again. O.C. Poirot folded the page back, closed the envelope, and slid it into the drawer with care. He would keep them safe for now. Perhaps one day, the world would be ready to hear Lena's side. Until then, it would live with him. That was his burden, as well as his gift. He walked back to the window, arms folded, and allowed the cool night breeze to reach his face. People so often thought of murder as sudden, a flash of rage, a momentary loss of control. But what of the crimes that grew slowly, in shadows? What of the cruelty of erasure, of voices muffled beneath wealth and name and shame? Greystone had been filled not with malice, but with cowardice. That, Poirot knew, was the root. Sir Alaric had not silenced Lena because he hated her. He had done it because she threatened the image he had crafted, an image where his son remained untarnished, where legacy reigned above consequence. A man like Alaric had no use for memory that contradicted his myth, so he buried it. And yet, the scream had risen. It had not been a violent crime, but it had been precise, controlled, orchestrated. In a way, Alaric had mirrored Poirot's own methods, arranging elements, manipulating perception, guiding outcomes. But where Poirot did so to uncover truth, Alaric had done so to obscure it. That was the difference. That was always the difference. Poirot recalled Beatrice's face that final morning. Relieved, but not free. It would take her time. But she had seen what silence could cost. She would not forget. A knock came at his door. Poirot turned and opened it. A bellboy stood with a telegram. "For you, monsieur." Poirot thanked him, tipped him generously, and returned to the chair before unfolding the message. Greystone case. Lady Tamsin left estate this morning. Destination unknown. Reeves in good health. Plans to stay on with Beatrice. Funeral attended by locals. No family. Flint Poirot set it aside. No surprise. Lady Tamsin had lived too long under another's silence. It was perhaps too late for her to speak now, but leaving was a form of statement too. He returned to his blank sheet of paper. The ink had dried at the top. He added just one more line beneath the name. She saw what others refused to see, and for that, she paid the price. Then he folded the page, slid it into an envelope, and labeled it simply, "To be opened upon my death." He knew someone would find it, and when they did, Lena's story would not disappear. Poirot glanced at the clock. Midnight. Time to rest. He moved to the bed, turned off the light, and lay back with hands folded across his chest. The hum of the city beyond the window was faint. In the darkness, his mind wandered not to crimes, not to culprits, but to voices. Soft voices, pushed aside. Voices like Lena's. He remembered the photograph, Oliver's arm around her, her eyes distant. The kind of distance that speaks not of shyness, but of survival. She had known even then that she would be left behind, but she had returned, and in doing so, she had made herself known. Poirot smiled faintly into the dark. "Yes, mademoiselle," he murmured. "You screamed. And now you are heard." And with that, Hercule Poirot closed his eyes, not in triumph, but in peace. Greystone Manor stood in the pale light of late spring, surrounded by hedges now overgrown and gravel walks no longer swept. The estate no longer held the pristine sharpness of the Cray dynasty. It had softened, faded slightly around the edges, but it had not fallen into disrepair. Beatrice had ensured that. The staff had been reduced. The windows no longer gleamed with the pride of aristocracy, but they were clean enough to let the sun in. The east wing remained closed, not out of shame, but reverence. A door once locked to hide a memory now stood shut to preserve one. Inside the library, Beatrice sat alone at the writing desk. Before her lay a small brown envelope, unopened. She had received it that morning from London, marked in a neat, careful hand. H. Poirot. No return address, no seal. She had waited several hours before finally opening it. Inside was a single page of cream stationery. Mademoiselle Beatrice, I trust this letter finds you in peace. I wish only to say that your courage during those final days at Greystone was the first true act of clarity that House had seen in many years. I've enclosed a transcript I prepared. Of the facts, yes, but more importantly, of the human truths beneath them. You may do with it what you wish. Publish it, burn it, bury it. But know that in doing so, Lena's voice will never be forgotten. Respectfully, Hercule Poirot. The second sheet was neatly typed, an account of the case stripped of sensationalism but layered with implication. It told of silence, of complicity, of a crime too quiet to draw headlines but too cruel to be ignored. She set it down carefully and stared out the window for some time. Downstairs, Reeves was polishing the banister. He moved slowly, with the weariness of a man carrying more than years. He had returned to his duties with quiet resilience. Beatrice had offered him retirement, a pension, even a small cottage nearby, but he had declined. He had worked at Greystone his entire life, and though the craze had gone, he told her, the house still needed someone who remembered. Beatrice stood and joined him on the stairs. "Would you mind joining me for tea in the garden?" she asked. Reeves gave a small nod. "It would be a pleasure, Miss Beatrice." They sat outside beneath the rose arbor. New buds had begun to bloom. The table was set simply, 2 cups, a pot of Earl Grey, and a small plate of lemon biscuits. Beatrice poured for both of them and said nothing for several minutes. The quiet between them was no longer heavy. It was healing. "You knew, didn't you?" she said at last. "About Lena." Reeves did not deny it. "Not everything, but I knew she had returned. I saw Sir Alaric with the key. I knew it wasn't right, but I was a servant, Miss Beatrice." and he was the master of the house. Beatrice stirred her tea slowly. "Not anymore." "No, miss," Reeves said gently. "Not anymore." Across the garden wall, a postman passed on his bicycle. Beyond the hedgerows, a village boy played with a stick along the lane. Greystone, once the epicenter of cold grandeur, now lay still and unremarkable. It no longer commanded fear, only memory. Beatrice looked at the transcript Poirot had sent and considered the possibilities. A friend of hers in London worked for a small literary journal. She could share the story under a pseudonym. Perhaps not now, but soon. One day, when she was ready. Later that evening, she wandered into the music room. The panel in the wall had been resealed. Not hidden, but noted. A small plaque now sat discreetly beside it. "Let truth reside where silence once ruled." The letters were no longer there. Poirot had taken them, as he had promised, to keep them safe, but the words remained with her. She had memorized parts of them. Lena's handwriting, delicate, looped, full of uncertainty and longing, had etched itself into Beatrice's thoughts. She sat at the piano and pressed a single note, then another. She had not played since childhood. The keys responded softly, not quite in tune. But it didn't matter. Behind her, the portrait of her mother had been taken down. The coastal landscape remained. The view of waves crashing against distant rocks felt truer now, beautiful but brutal. Nature did not hide what it destroyed. It showed its scars openly. Patrick sent a letter a week later. "I'm in St. Ives, teaching for now. It's quiet here. I've started painting again. Nothing serious, but I find it calms the restlessness. I think of you often. If you ever decide to leave Greystone, you're welcome here. The coast is less haunted, or perhaps more honest about it. Yours, Patrick." She didn't write back. Not yet. But she folded the letter carefully and placed it with Poirot's. She would stay for now. Not out of duty, but because Greystone was no longer only a symbol of silence. It was a place where something had been broken open, and she intended to ensure it remained open. For truth. For change. In London, Poirot was already preparing for his next case. A missing manuscript, a poisoned box of chocolates, and a rather pompous solicitor with too much money and not enough imagination. He had already sent for Hastings to join him, but before turning to his files, he paused and opened a slim leather book he kept on the side of his desk. Inside were notes on every case he had worked, each one distilled to a single line. Under the scream, behind the door, he had written, "Justice sometimes comes, not with a bang, but with a whisper finally heard." He closed the book, satisfied. There would be other mysteries, there always were. But this one, he felt, would remain with him longer than most, because Lena Morel had not died in vain. She had reminded them all, detective, daughter, servant, and even murderer, that truth cannot be locked away forever. And in that, Hercule Poirot found peace. The train compartment was quiet. Not the silence of emptiness, but the quiet that follows understanding, a space where nothing more needs to be said. Hercule Poirot sat alone, his traveling coat buttoned, gloves resting in his lap, the faint rhythmic rattle of the tracks beneath him as steady as his breath. Outside the window, the English countryside passed in soft watercolor, rolling green fields, distant stone fences, the occasional grazing sheep. It was a pastoral world, peaceful and unsuspecting. It did not know, could not know, of what had occurred within the manicured walls of Greystone Manor. But Poirot knew, and that was enough. In the seat beside him sat a small attaché case, locked, containing Lena Morel's letters, her final note, and the transcript he had prepared for Beatrice. The case held no jewelry, no scandalous photographs, no dramatic artifacts. Only words. but words, he knew, could weigh heavier than lead. He took out a handkerchief and dabbed lightly at his mustache, then leaned back, allowing his mind to settle fully. The case was over. The conclusion had been reached, and yet, unlike others, this one did not feel clean. It felt unfinished, not in evidence, not in clarity, but in consequence. He thought of Beatrice, of the moment she laid the daffodil at Lena's grave, of how she had looked not like a mourner, but like someone being reborn. He thought of Reeves, polishing the stair rail as though restoring time, of Lady Tamsin, drifting into obscurity, perhaps finally facing the mirror she had avoided for years, of Patrick, uncertain but no longer pretending, and he thought of Lena. He remembered the photograph, her figure just off-center, her smile brittle, the kind of smile that knew it would not last. And yet she had returned. She had screamed. She had ensured that her voice, once stolen, would echo through the manor's walls, not as an accusation, but as truth. There was a knock on the door of the compartment. Poirot opened his eyes. The conductor stood politely. "Monsieur Poirot, would you care for tea?" Poirot gave a small smile. "Oui, merci. With lemon, if you please." The door closed. Poirot looked back out the window. In truth, there had been no single killer, not in the way the public liked to imagine. There had been no bloody knife, no poisoned chalice. There had only been omissions, refusals to act, complicity through comfort. Sir Alaric had not held a weapon, but he had created the conditions in which a death became inevitable. That, too, was murder. Poirot reflected, not for the first time, on the nature of justice. The law could only reach so far, but human beings could choose to carry truth further, in memory, in action, in words. Lena had never received an apology. She had not been offered a seat in the drawing room. But in death, she had become the most present person in that household. Every conversation had bent around her. Every secret had collapsed because of her scream. And now, the house bore her presence like a scar that refused to fade. The conductor returned with tea. Poirot took it gratefully, sipping once, then setting it aside. He reached into his coat pocket and retrieved a second notebook, one he rarely used. In it, he recorded only the lessons of each case, not the names, not the details, just the essence. Beneath his entry for Greystone Manor, he wrote, "To silence a person is not to erase them, it is merely to postpone the truth. And truth, like the heart, will one day beat loud enough to be heard, no matter how thick the walls." He closed the notebook and smiled, faintly. He would not remember Greystone for the scandal, nor for the Cray family. He would remember it for the moment Beatrice turned away from her lineage and toward the grave of a girl her family had tried to forget. He would remember it as the place where someone once ignored had forced the world to stop and listen. And that, to Hercule Poirot, was justice. As the train continued its smooth glide toward London, Poirot leaned back, folded his hands over his chest, and allowed himself a moment of rest. Not because the mystery had been solved, but because, for once, the silence had been broken. And sometimes that is all a detective can hope for.